Hi and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem and today we're working with designer bead strands. We're going to work on a technique that we recently learned, which was the spiral bead cage, and we're going to use that to create distinctive and unique bracelets. I've already created a piece with the marigold strand, as you've just seen, and now we're going to work together with midnight green. Beautiful, beautiful beads there. Let's head down to the board and create jewellery together. So you can see the bead order if you wish to recreate the marigold designer bead strand bracelet with that beautiful spiral spring form over the top of that central bead. I just wanted to take a moment to introduce you to midnight green if you've never seen it before. These are a beautiful collection of colours, really gorgeous greens, and I adore these composite beads with those little rhinestones, but best on the strand for me are these beauties. So I'm going to cut this strand and pick which ones I want to use in today's project. I have 4 crimps, 4 crimp covers, a clasp set and some beading wire. I've cut the midnight green beautiful bead strand and I've chosen my bead order, and as you can see I've still got beautiful beads left over to play with later on. Now to make the spiral, and I've already got 2 set up, it's exactly the same as if you're going to make a cage, but we stop slightly before the end of the process. So this is a 10-inch length of 18 gauge round wire. This is an antique bronze colour copper core medium temper. And I'm just giving that a quick warm through to make sure that it's nice and supple. I'm going to begin spiralling at one end. You can use your round nose pliers. I'm going to use the 2mm pin on my memory wire finishing pliers. If I start by rotating those around until I get almost a complete round form, and then I'm going to commence making a flat spiral. The reason that I use the memory wire finishing pliers is to try and get the same size hole at each end of the little bead cage that we're creating. So another way that you can do that is by using your multi-step bail making pliers, or you can use standard round nose pliers and just apply a small amount of marker pen to the size of the side of those round nose pliers, just by a little mark, and then you'll be able to recreate that size hole on the other end. So just before I get about halfway along that 10-inch length of wire, I'm going to switch to the other end. So as you can see on the board right now, the spiral is facing down towards me. So I will need to create the other spiral in the opposite direction. So if I grip with the memory wire finishing pliers at the end of that wire, start turning that around to begin that round form, and then just push that into my non-dominant hand to create the spiral. If it does twist slightly, you can very quickly bring that back to true. So when you're making spirals, what you will need to do is just take your time. The neater you want them to become, the more time you should allow for it. So with the bead cage, they don't need to be super perfect, super tight, but they do need to be kept nice and flat. So every piece of wire is spinning around the outside of the preceding wire. So we have this beautiful double spiral. If you have a little bit of a baggy moment like so, you can just open that back out, apply some warmth onto that piece of wire, and draw that back around. But as I said, it doesn't matter if it's not completely perfect. When you get closer to the middle, you can just take a moment to estimate to make sure that you have 2 equally sized spirals. Now these 10-inch lengths of wire that I've used to create these other 2 spirals are plenty large enough for the beautiful large bead on this gorgeous midnight green strand, which measures around about 11mm. So if you need to use a different bead other than the midnight green, you can obviously make the wire slightly longer or slightly shorter accordingly. Let's pop that back down. So once you've got those 2 spirals, you can take a second just to make sure that you're happy with them. Give them a teeny tiny squish to make them nice and strong. What we're going to do then is grab halfway between and just fold them ever so slightly. I haven't completely folded them away, just a tiny angle to give you an idea What we're going to do now is use our round nose pliers to just open those up into 2 halves of this spiral cage. So I'm going to use my finger and thumbnails just to draw that down gently over the round nose plier, and you can open them out very, very softly and slowly. Take that one pin off, switch over to the other side and go again. So just do take your time, and if by any chance you should make a large gap in between those 2 passes of wire, you can simply just squish that back up and then gently open it out until you have a more even shape. So once you're happy that those 2 spiral, they look like bunny earpieces now. Once those 2 have opened up and you're happy that they're relatively symmetrical, we're going to continue to fold that over so that it sits closed up. So one of the ways that you can do that is grip between those 2 spirals and then just bring them back together. Now you will need to take a moment just to make sure that that sits exactly how you have envisaged it. So you can see that it takes a moment just to make sure that you're happy, but very, very quickly you've built that same spiral. Now instead of opening up one or both of those loops at the ends, we're going to leave this as it is, and you can compress that slightly if you prefer. The next thing we're going to do is to just sight that bead inside the spiral. So you can open that spiral up in the middle, be aware of where those bead holes are and sit them approximately facing those end sections, and then take a moment just to bring that spiral cage all the way around your bead. Now if you've got good eyes, you'll see that that's tilted slightly. So we have a scrap piece of wire to help us get this nice and straight. Just a short length of 18 gauge that I have on my desk, and what I'm going to do is to post that down in through one of those ends and just try and catch where the bead hole is and just give that a bit of a wiggle until you get that wire out the other side. So you can see that's come through the centre of this bead spiral on the second side. This also gives you an opportunity just to make sure that that spiral sits exactly how you want it. So give that a nice little squish and you'll see that that sits beautifully now. Now I have seen people use bead spirals like this in jewellery, but connect either end to another piece of chain. What can happen if you do that is if the chain catches, the spiral will simply come undone and the bead will come away. So what we're going to do today is to thread everything onto a piece of beading wire. So I have a length of beading wire here which is around about 1.5 inches to 2 inches longer than my finished bracelet needs to be. And what I'm going to do is begin by feeding on the first half of my design, which is just a cascade of those beads. Now I'm not going to make you watch me do that because I'm terrible at threading beads, so I'll join you back in just a second. So to make life easier and to prevent my beads slipping onto the floor, I've crimped and crimp covered one end of that beading wire and added one part of my clasp. So I've added some beads onto this end and I've just double checked that they are the same as I have on the other side of the board. What we're going to do now is show you how, once you've got that centralised wire, just making sure that the bead is lined up, you can either thread that beading thread through the hole where the wire is sitting out the other side and then remove the wire, and in that way you fed that bead with its beautiful springy cage on top directly into position. Then you can add your next bead in the mix. Or you can do this without the wire at all. If you've taken a moment to use your scrap of wire to line everything up, that should be relatively easy. Just check that it comes out of the correct part. So either or, you can use the wire as a guide because the hole in the bead is large enough to enable both the beading thread and that piece of 18 gauge wire to sit side by side inside that bead aperture. So I'm going to continue adding the remainder of my beads and then I'll meet you at the other end. So I've double checked that all of those beads are as I want them to be. Now, if you should find at this stage that actually your bracelet is slightly shorter than you wanted it to be, one of the joys of this design is that you can open up each of these bead cages slightly. So just grip at either end and very softly open that up. There's no fear that your bead is going to leave because it's actually on that beading wire. So it's part of the bracelet already. You can just open that up very, very softly. Try to get them to be as even as possible, and then you've extended your bracelet by a couple of millimeters, and sometimes that's all you need to do. Equally, if it's a little bit large, you can squish and compress them. We do have more beads to play with. Should we want to, we can add some more into that mix, but I'm just going to finish off now with a couple of crimp covers and that other side of the toggle clasp. So here we have our two decadent beaded bracelets featuring midnight green and marigold, which are both designer bead strands. As you can see, there's only a single bead cage in the bracelet on the right, and there are 3 in the one on the left. I hope you've enjoyed our Jessie James Beads tutorial today, and I hope that you also love these beads.